You hear it first, the wet drag of flesh on stone, a sound like meat being scraped across a butcher's block, but slower, deliberate, rhythmic. Look down. There's a man naked bound to a wooden frame, face pressed into the filth of a London street. His back is no longer skin. It's raw, open. You can see muscle tissue glistening red through torn flesh. In the deepest wounds, there's white bone for miles. They've dragged him 4 miles like this through the heart of London and is still breathing. The crowd lines the streets, thousands of them, men, women, children perched on their fathers' shoulders for a better view. They throw things, rotten fruit, stones, animal waste. The objects bounce off exposed muscle, off bone. They scream at him, mock him, some laugh. A vendor passes through the crowd selling meat pies. No one looks away. It's August 23rd, 1305, 9 in the morning, and what happens next will take 5 hours. 5 hours of choreographed agony. 5 hours where every cut, every breath, every scream was planned in advance by men who'd spent years perfecting their craft. Every second of it was designed not to kill him quickly, but to destroy him completely. Body, legacy, and the very idea he represented. Welcome to Crimson Historians, where we dig into the blood-soaked truths history tried to bury. We don't sanitize the past here. We don't soften the edges or skip the ugly parts. We show you what really happened. The stuff your textbooks left out, the stuff that made people vomit, faint, and question everything they thought they knew about justice. If you're ready for that, if you want history without the filter, then hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community of 100,000 truth seekers, and we need you to get there. Click subscribe. It takes 1 second, and it tells YouTube to show you more content like this. You've seen Braveheart. You think you know this story. You don't. What I'm about to show you doesn't come from Hollywood. It comes from medieval court records, eyewitness chronicles, written in Latin by monks who were there. Forensic analysis of execution methods used for over 500 years. By the end of this, you'll know 3 things most people never learn. The legal loophole Edward I exploited to justify what he did. The medical reason Wallace stayed conscious far longer than should have been possible. And the one detail so disturbing that even hardened executioners, men who killed for a living, refused to participate. You'll also understand why this execution didn't just kill a man. It changed the definition of cruelty in English law. It created a template for state-sanctioned torture that would be used for the next 5 centuries. The last person to suffer this exact punishment died in 1820, over 500 years later. This is the story of how a king tried to destroy a legend and accidentally made it immortal. Before he became the man being dragged through London streets, before his name made English soldiers check the shadows, William Wallace was nobody. Born around 1270 in Elders Lie, Renfrew, a place so small most maps didn't bother marking it. His father was Sir Malcolm Wallace. And here's where the movies lied to you. Malcolm wasn't a peasant. He was a minor landowner. The family had land, just not much of it. Enough to eat, enough to matter locally. Not enough to matter to kings. Young William was educated by his uncle, a priest at Junipes. That detail matters because most men of his class couldn't read, couldn't write. Wallace could do both. He spoke Latin, the language of law and church, French, the language of nobility, English, Scots for languages, unusual for someone born into his station. For 27 years his life was unremarkable, the kind of existence that doesn't make it into chronicles or songs. He would have died unknown, forgotten, just another Scottish landowner's son who lived, worked, and disappeared into history's silence. Then the English came. Edward I called him Longshanks because he stood 6 feet 2 inches in tall, a giant in an age when most men barely reached 5'1" over 2 feet, invaded Scotland, declared himself overlord, forced the Scottish nobles to sign an oath of loyalty in what became known as the Ragman Rolls. He humiliated them, stripped them, made them crawl. He stole Scotland's coronation stone, the Stone of Destiny, and dragged it back to Westminster like a trophy, displayed it under his throne. So every Scottish lord who came to pay homage would have to see it, would have to know their legitimacy. Now rested under an English king's backside, the Scots started calling their exiled king John Balol Tum Tabat, empty coat, a man with a title and no power. Wallace didn't care about thrones or crowns, or the wounded pride of nobles who bent the knee to save their estates. He cared about a woman. Her name was Marion Braveheart. Some sources say she was his wife, others say lover. The chronicles can't agree on the relationship, but they agree on what happened to her. The English sheriff of Lanark, William Wallace, killed her, murdered her because Wallace had refused to submit to English soldiers, because he'd fought back when they tried to take what was his because he wouldn't bend. What Wallace did next wasn't strategic, wasn't calculated, it was rage. May 1297, middle of the night, Wallace and 30 men attacked Lan, found Heselig in his bed, killed him there. Not quick, not clean. Then they burned the English garrison to the ground, slaughtered 240 soldiers. Scotland woke up the next morning with a new problem. England woke up with a nightmare. A man with nothing to lose became Scotland's most dangerous weapon. 4 months later, September 11, 1297, Wallace commanded 3,000 Scots at Stirling Bridge, across the narrow bridge. 10,000 English soldiers, heavy cavalry, longbow bowmen, the most feared army in Europe, professional killers who'd conquered Wales and crushed rebellion after rebellion. Wallace didn't have professional soldiers. He had farmers, merchants, men who picked up weapons because they had no choice. And he waited. The English started crossing the bridge. It was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 horsemen to ride abreast. Their commander, the Earl of Surrey, was so confident he hadn't even bothered to scout for alternate crossing points. Wallace waited until exactly half the English army had crossed. 10,000 men split perfectly in two by a wooden bridge. Then he attacked, caught them in the bottleneck. The English on the far side couldn't help. The ones who crossed couldn't retreat. They were trapped between the Scots and the river. 2 hours later, 5,000 English soldiers were dead. The River Forth ran red for days. Among the dead was Hugh Cressingham, Edward's treasurer in Scotland, a man so hated that after the battle, the Scots skinned his corpse, made belts from the leather. Wallace allegedly kept a strip of Cressingham's skin on his sword belt. The victory was so complete, so humiliating that the Scottish nobles, the same ones who'd bent the knee, who'd signed Edward's oaths, named Wallace Guardian of Scotland, a commoner born to a minor landowner. Given a title that had only ever gone to Essen lords, unprecedented for 1 year, William Wallace ruled Scotland not as king, as guardian protector. Then came Falkirk, July 22, 1298. This time Edward himself led the army, 25,000 men, the full weight of English military power. Wallace had maybe 7,000, mostly infantry, few cavalry, no longbowmen. The English arrows tore through the Scottish formations like cloth. Thousands dead in the first hour. Wallace tried to hold the line, tried to turn the battle. He couldn't. Folk was a massacre. Wallace's army shattered, scattered. But here's the thing about Wallace. He didn't surrender, didn't send envoys to negotiate, didn't bend the knee to save his life. He disappeared into the countryside and waged guerrilla war for 7 more years. 7 years of ambushes, raids, burning English supply lines, vanishing into forests and glens before the soldiers could regroup. 7 years of making Edward Longshanks, the man who crushed Wales, expelled every Jew from England, the man who terrified his own nobles, look like a fool. Edward spent over £100,000 trying to catch him. In modern currency, that's over 80 million. He mobilized armies, built a spy network, offered bounties, imprisoned families of suspected Wallace sympathizers, and Wallace kept slipping through his fingers until he didn't. By 1305, Scotland was broken. Most of the nobility had surrendered again, signed new oaths, accepted English rule in exchange for keeping their lands, their titles, their comfortable lives. They'd done the math. Survival beat pride. Wallace never did that math. He was the last one standing, the last man who refused to call Edward his king, and that made him unbearable. Edward built an intelligence network across Scotland like a spider builds a web. Tavern keepers on English payroll, merchants reporting travelers, priests passing information, servants listening at doors, the exchequer rolls, royal financial records preserved in the National Archives, show payments to informants in Scottish regions, silver changing hands for whispers about Wallace's location. Edward also made the stakes clear. Anyone caught helping Wallace would die, the same way Wallace would die hanged, drawn, quartered. Your family would lose everything. Your name would be erased. The pressure was relentless. Wallace's circle of trust collapsed. By 1305, maybe 10 people in all of Scotland could be trusted. Maybe fewer than that. Every meal could be his last. Every bed could be a trap. One of those 10 trusted people was Sir John de Ment. Scottish knights seemed loyal, had fought against the English, hosted Wallace at his properties. He wasn't loyal. August 3, 1305. Not the 5th, like some sources claim. The 3rd, Wallace was staying at the home of Ralph Day in Roston, just outside Glasgow. Meneth knew he'd be there. So did Jack Short, Wallace's own servant. So did 2 others whose names were never recorded, deliberately obscured by those who survived. They invited Wallace to dinner. Wine was served. Some chronicles suggest it was drugged, not enough to kill, just enough to make him drowsy, slow his reflexes. They took him while he slept. Imagine it. You close your eyes in what you think is safety among people you've trusted, maybe even loved. You wake to the sound of armor, chains, cold iron closing around your wrists. You look up and see faces you know, men you've eaten with, men you thought would die before betraying you, and you realize the wine tasted wrong. Meneth received lands worth 100% annually. The payment is documented in the English exchequer rolls. Blood money, a fortune. Jack Short got less. The 2 unnamed conspirators got enough to disappear. But here's what makes it worse. They didn't just capture Wallace and take him to England. They paraded him through Scotland first. For 17 days, Wallace was transported south in an iron cage mounted on a cart. They displayed him in Scottish towns. Let the people see their hero bound, broken, no longer dangerous. The journey took 17 days because they stopped deliberately made it a tour. They wanted every Scot to see him in chains before the English did. They didn't just capture Scotland's hero. They made sure every Scot saw him in chains first. Made sure the hope died before the man did. August 22, 1305 evening. Wallace arrived in London. 80,000 people, the largest city he'd ever seen. They housed him at William Dare's residence in Fenchurch Street. 20 men-at-arms stood guard, not for security, for ceremony. The chronicles say Wallace refused food that night, spent the hours in prayer, Latin phrases through the door. He asked for a priest. He wasn't given one. Morning came. They dressed him in sackcloth, traitor's gar. Ments. At 8, the procession began. Wallace was mounted on what they called a poor horse, a nag, deliberately inferior. Around him, the mayor of London, 2 sheriffs, 6 aldermen, 20 knights, all on war horses, 2.5 miles to Westminster, 90 minutes. Thousands lined the streets, threw rotten food, stones, feces, screamed, called him demon, Scottish dog. Wallace said nothing. Westminster Hall was waiting, 240 feet long, built in 1097 as a monument to Norman power. A wooden platform stood 4 feet high at the south end. The seats were full, nobility who'd paid to watch. 5 judges in scarlet robes, Sir Peter Mallory at the center. As Wallace was dragged onto the platform, they placed a crown on his head. Oak and laurel leaves twisted into a wreath. The English claimed Wallace had boasted he deserved to wear a crown at Westminster. No Scottish source confirms this. It was propaganda, but it worked. The crowd jeered. Mallory stood. Read the charges: treason, sedition, murder without regard to age or sex, robbery, arson, the killing at Stirling Bridge, burning churches, invading Northumberland, acting as guardian without authority. 15 minutes of accusations. When he finished, Wallace spoke Latin first, then English. I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject. Under English law, treason meant breaking an oath to your king. Wallace had never sworn loyalty to Edward. He'd fought for Scotland's rightful king, John Balliol, for Scottish independence. Legally, he couldn't be guilty of treason. Edward knew this, so his lawyers added another charge that Wallace had tried to make himself King of Scotland. No evidence exists for this claim. None. It was invented to justify the treason charge. The trial lasted under 30 minutes. Wallace had no right to defend himself. His words were noted, then dismissed. Mallory pronounced the sentence. You shall be drawn to Smithfield, hanged by the neck, but not until dead, cut down while living, your privy parts cut off and burned before your eyes, your bowels and heart removed and burned, then your head cut off and your body quartered, your head displayed on London Bridge, your quarters sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Hanged, drawn, quartered. The first fully documented execution of its kind. It would become the legal standard for high treason for 500 years. This wasn't justice. This was vengeance wrapped in legal robes. Before we continue, I need to stop. We're 5 minutes into Wallace's worst day, and I've already shared details you won't find elsewhere. This research took over 40 hours. Medieval chronicles in Latin, court records, historians specializing in medieval law. If you're learning something real here, hit that like button. Takes half a second. Tells YouTube to show this to more people who care about actual history. Here's the reality. 88% of you haven't subscribed. You're here, you're engaged, but you're not helping us grow. Every subscriber matters. Every like pushes this to someone else who needs the truth. If you want more like this uncomfortable truths, stories, textbook skip, subscribe to Crimson Historians right now. And if you're not subscribing, tell me why in the comments. What are we missing? I read everyone back to August 23, 1305. Because what happens next is where execution becomes inadequate. Guards seized Wallace, tore his clothes off in Westminster Hall in front of hundreds. They dragged him outside to the hurdle, a wooden frame 8x4 FT covered in oxhide, the kind used to drag supplies. They threw him face down, tied his arms wide, legs spread, rope at wrists and ankles, a wooden beam under his chest. That beam wasn't mercy. It kept his face from dragging flat, prevented suffocation, made sure his head hit cobblestones without knocking him unconscious too quickly. 2 draft horses, Bran and Goliath. Westminster to Smithfield, 3.88 miles through the most populated parts of London. King Street, the Strand, Fleet Street, Ludgate Hill. 2 hours at walking pace. 2 hours face down, naked, dragged across cobblestones. First 100 yards, skin erades, burns. Quarter mile, the outer layer is gone. Bleeding. 1 mile, muscle tissue visible. 2 miles, bone shows through the deepest wounds. Your skin has 200 nerve endings per square cm. Modern forensic analysis confirms the victim stays conscious. No severe head trauma, no rapid blood loss, just shock, which doesn't mean sleep. It means your nerves are on fire. 10 to 15,000 people lined the route through objects, screamed. Some sections fell silent, possibly sympathizers, possibly horror. Street vendors followed, sold refreshments. Parents lifted children, educational purposes. Wallace's eyes stayed open, lips moving, prayer. Witnesses assumed. Behind him, a dark trail of blood and tissue. One monk wrote, his back was flayed to the bone in places, yet he spoke no word of plea. 11:30 a.m., Smithfield 10 acres, London's execution ground since 1196. The scaffold, 8 feet high, 20 feet wide, gallows at center tools, visible brazier glowing quartering block ropes, chains, knives, 5 to 8,000 people. Temporary grandstands for the wealthy 2p per seat. Wallace was hauled up back. Destroyed. Face, broken nose shattered, eyes swollen shut, missing teeth, still conscious. They dragged him up the scaffold stairs, blood on every step. The crowd roared, then silence. The executioner stepped forward, hooded, black robes. John Delton, London's chief headsman, 3 assistants beside him, the tools laid out where Wallace could see, where the crowd could see. Medieval executions were psychological. You made them see what was coming. Let their imagination do half the work. Wallace saw everything. He knew. So did 8,000 people watching. He'd survived the journey. Now came the performance. The noose was hemp rope, an inch-and-a-half thick, rough fiber. The executioner positioned it around Wallace's neck. The knot went behind his left ear, not his throat, behind his left ear. That placement compressed the carotid artery and jugular on one side. Caused strangulation, not a broken neck. A broken neck is fast. Strangulation is slow. 2 assistants pulled the rope. Wallace lifted 18 in off the scaffold, not high enough to snap his neck, just high enough to cut off air. His body fought back, legs kicking, torso twisting, the dance. His face turned red, then purple, then dark purple, capillaries bursting, tongue swelling, turning black, foam at his lips, eyes bulging, and he was awake for it. 2 to 3 minutes of drowning in air. The executioner watched, waiting for the exact moment. Too long and Wallace dies. Execution ruined. Too short and he recovers too quickly. 2.5 minutes. The sweet spot. John Delton made 20 shillings for this. He was good at his job. The signal came. I cut the rope. Wallace dropped 2 feet onto the scaffold, hit hard for a moment. Stillness, then violent gasping. His crushed windpipe trying to suck air like an animal. Wet, choking, blood-tinged spittle, body convulsing. A monk wrote, he gasped like a beast brought to slaughter, yet lived still. They let him recover. 2 minutes, 3. Just enough for his brain to register he wasn't dead. Then they dragged him to the table, 7 feet long, 3 feet wide, tilted at 15 degrees so the crowd could see. Iron manacles at wrists, ankles, waist. A leather strap across his forehead. That strap kept his head still. Kept him from looking away because they wanted him to watch. The executioner selected a knife, long, narrow, sharp. He moved between Wallace's legs. What I'm about to describe is documented. The first cut came above Wallace's groin. Precise, clean. Blood ran down his thighs. The emasculation was staged, prolonged. First, the testicles severed, held up for the crowd. They roared. He threw them in the brazier, the smell of burning flesh. Several people vomited. Then the penis removed slowly. Wallace's screams started here. Roar, primal. A witness wrote, his cries were such as to make men weep who had no cause to love him. 3 to 4 minutes for complete emasculation. Then the executioner moved to Wallace's abdomen, positioned the knife at his sternum, cut straight down. 12 in through skin, fat, muscle. The key was depth. Too deep, he bleeds out. Too shallow, organs can't be extracted. Medieval executioners learned this through years of practice. He parted the wound with both hands, opened Wallace like a book. Inside, intestines, stomach, liver, all visible, pulsing. Wallace's head was as strapped. He could see. He was watching his body be opened. The executioner reached inside, grasped the small intestine, 20 feet of it, pulled slowly, about a foot every 10 seconds, 3 to 4 minutes of continuous pulling. The intestines came out in coils, glistening, dark red. He threw them in the brazier. The smell, burning intestines, fecal matter, blood, flesh. Vendors sold her bundles to mask it, documented in city expense records. Wallace's screams changed, a high-pitched keening, barely human. Some chronicles say he called out in Latin in Manus tuis domin, into your hands, Lord. Medieval belief intestines were the seat of courage. Burning them destroyed the person's will. The executioner reached in again. Stomach, liver, spleen, kidneys, his arms bloody to the elbows. 10 to 15 minutes of evisceration. Modern trauma medicine tells us consciousness could be retained this long. The table tilt maintained blood pressure to the brain. Staged removal prevented rapid hemorrhage. Shock heightened awareness. Adrenaline at maximum. Medieval medicine didn't understand it, but they knew it worked. The crowd shifted. Initial bloodlust became silence. Some left. Parents covered children's eyes. Too late, women fainted. Soldiers vomited. Public executions were common. But this was extreme even for medieval London. Typical hanging 5 to 10 minutes. Wallace's execution over 90 minutes. Still not finished. They'd come for justice. Got a horror show even London couldn't stomach. The burning entrails served multiple purposes. Practical prevented clutter. Symbolic destroyed the traitor's inner character. Religious purification by fire. The smoke was visible across London. The smell car. IED on wind. The brazier sat directly in Wallace's sight-line, watching his own organs burn. They were erasing William Wallace from existence. Body, soul, legacy. Or so they thought. Wallace's state was unclear. Sources conflict. Most likely shock-induced semi-consciousness. Eyes rolling back. Shallow breathing. The executioner assessed. The victim was fading. Time to finish. Tool change. Knives to heavy axe. 5 lb head. 3-foot handle. Broad blade honed specifically for this execution. Symbolic shift. Surgical precision to brutal finality. They dragged Wallace to the chopping block. Wooden concave top for neck placement. His body was barely responsive. The crowd fell completely silent. The executioner raised the axe high. The first blow missed a clean cut. Wallace's neck muscles contracted. His body moved. All the executioner deep wound, partial severing, blood sprayed. Wallace's body convulsed violently. The crowd gasped. Audible shock at the botched beheading. The executioner's reputation was at stake. 3 seconds later, he swung again. This time, successful. The head separated, fell forward off the block. Blood sprayed from the neck stump, 3 to 4 feet high, arterial. The executioner grasped the head by the hair, raised it high. The ritual words, "Behold the head of a traitor." He turned to all 4 corners, showed every section of the crowd. Witnesses claimed the lips were still moving. Likely muscle spasms, not consciousness. Time of death officially recorded, 12:47 p.m. Execution began around 11:30 a.m. Total time approximately 1 hour and 17 minutes. Now came the quartering. Body placed on a massive wooden table. Tool change again. Large cleaver. The assistants took over from the primary executioner. This was butchery, not surgery. Arms removed at the shoulder joints. Required leverage, multiple strikes. Right arm, 4 strikes to separate. Left arm, 3 strikes. Legs at the hip joints. More difficult, larger bones. Right leg, 6 strikes. Left leg, 5 strikes. Then the torso split longitudinally down the spine. Initial cut with axe. Finished with saw. Result, 2 halves. Total body parts, head for limbs. 2 torso halves, 7 pieces. Each piece cleaned of excess blood with cloths, wrapped in cloth, salted for preservation. By this point, most of the crowd had left. Only hundreds remained. They turned a man into components, parts to be shipped like cargo. The scaffold was awash in blood, 5 liters or more. Assistants collected organ ashes from the brazier, body parts placed in separate barrels, salt-packed, tar-sealed. Total time on scaffold approximately 2 hours. The crowd was mostly gone. The festival atmosphere over, remaining spectators were quiet, some visibly disturbed, children crying despite their parents' intentions to teach them a lesson. Vendors disposed of unsold food. No one was hungry. Court scribes had recorded every detail for royal records. The execution expenses totaled £2,614 shillings 8, perved in the pipe rolls, executioner's fee, materials, guard pay, transport costs. Edward wanted accountability. He wanted history to remember exactly what he'd done. I need to stop here again because what you just heard that happened, this isn't fiction. This isn't exaggeration. This is documented in multiple medieval chronicles, court records, eyewitness accounts. I've spent weeks researching this single day in history, not because I enjoy the horror, but because Wallace's story deserves to be told completely, not sanitized. If this video made you feel something, anger at Edward's cruelty, admiration for Wallace's courage, shock at medieval justice, then you owe it to his memory to hit that like button. Here's what a like does. It tells YouTube's algorithm this matters. It pushes this video to history students, to people researching medieval law, to anyone who needs to understand what resistance actually costs. We're 13 minutes in. You've invested 13 minutes of your life in this story. Clicking like takes 1 second. Subscribing to Crimson Historians takes 2 seconds, and it ensures we can keep doing this level of research. Right now, our like-to-view ratio should be at least 10%. That means if 10,000 people watch this, 1,000 should like it. Let's beat that. Let's hit 15%. And if you're still not subscribed, seriously, why? What are we missing? Tell me in the comments. I promise I'll respond. We're trying to build the best history channel on YouTube, and we need your feedback to do it. All right, Wallace is dead. But his story isn't over, because what Edward did next was even more calculated than the execution itself. Wallace's head received special treatment. Parboiling. The head was submerged in boiling water mixed with bay leaves and salt, 15 to 20 minutes, just long enough to halt decomposition, prevent rotting. Then the entire head was dipped in tar. Pine tar sticky preservative. An iron spike 18 in long was driven through the base of the skull. Destination London Bridge, Southern Gatehouse. Highest point visible from both banks of the Thames. Installation date, August 24, 1305. The next D.I. Wallace's head joined approximately 30 other heads already displayed there. A gallery of traitors. It remained until the bridge was renovated in the 1390s, possibly 85 years or more. Heads were inspected monthly, replaced if too deteriorated. 2 guards were assigned to prevent theft. Sympathizers stealing heads was common enough to require security. The body quarters were prepared for their own journeys. Quarter 1 went to Newcastle upon Tyne. 5 days by cart displayed at the city gates. Main entrance. Newcastle was a border fortress. The quarter served as a warning to every Scot crossing into England. Thousands saw it annually. It remained until 1314, removed after Bannockburn when Robert the Bruce finally defeated the English. Quarter 2 went to Berwick upon Tweed. 6 days' travel displayed at Scots Gate. The irony. Berwick was a town Wallace had liberated in 1297. Now it would display his rotting flesh as a warning against liberation. Quarter 3, Stirling, the site of Wallace's greatest victory, where he destroyed an English army and humiliated Edward's commanders. Now Stirling would display the remains of its hero. Quarter 4, Perth, another major Scottish town, another warning. Edward's strategy was clear. Every major population centre in Scotland would see a piece of Wallace, a constant reminder of English power, of the futility of resistance. But here's what Edward didn't understand. He'd miscalculated badly. The execution was supposed to terrify Scotland into permanent submission. Instead, it did the opposite. The quarters became pilgrimage sites. Scots traveled dangerous roads just to see the remains of their hero. Not in fear, in reverence. English guards reported mysterious offerings left near the displays. Flowers, ribbons appearing overnight despite strict prohibitions. Wallace's dead body was doing what his living presence had done, inspiring resistance through sheer stubborn existence. Within months, Scottish minstrels composed songs about the execution, raw, angry laments that turned English cruelty into Scottish determination. The English tried to suppress the songs, made singing about Wallace a punishable offense that only drove them underground, where they grew darker, more powerful. Even English soldiers who'd witnessed the execution began spreading a different story. They'd expected to watch a demon die. Instead, they'd seen a man endure torture that would break anyone, yet refused to break. These accounts, whispered in barracks and taverns, created a counter-narrative. Wallace the monster became Wallace the man. Somehow more frightening, the Scottish Church embraced him. Priests who'd once urged accommodation with England now preached sermons about the martyred knight, drew parallels between Wallace's suffering and Christ's passion, dangerous territory. But the clergy recognized an opportunity. Wallace's death had created a way to unite a fractured nation around shared outrage. Robert the Bruce, who'd previously collaborated with the English who'd even helped hunt Wallace, was reportedly among those deeply affected. Less than a year later, Bruce raised the standard of rebellion again, this time successfully. When asked what drove him to risk the same fate as Wallace, Bruce allegedly replied he'd rather die like Wallace than live as Edward's slave. The execution meant to end Scottish independence had instead galvanized it. Edward I died in 1307, just 2 years after Wallace's execution, died still fighting Scottish rebels, his life's work of conquering Scotland incomplete. On his deathbed, he reportedly ordered his bones carried with English armies until Scotland was fully subdued. Even in death, Edward couldn't let go. But his son Edward II lacked his father's iron will. The Scottish resistance that Wallace had started, and his death had energized, would triumph at Bannockburn in 1314. 700 years later, William Wallace's name still echoes, not because of what he did in life, though that was considerable because of how he died. Edward tried to destroy a man so completely that even his memory would vanish. Instead, he created a legend that outlived the English medieval monarchy itself. The execution that was supposed to terrify became the symbol of why some principles are worth any suffering to defend. Wallace's defiant words at trial still resonate. Legitimate authority requires consent. Sovereignty cannot be imposed by force alone. His broken body proved something Edward never understood. Sometimes martyrdom is victory. The human spirit, even when destroyed, can triumph over tyranny. That's the real story of August 23, 1305.